Valley had gone silent. That was the first sign something had gone catastrophically wrong. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, Major Kevin Aldrich stared at the communications display with the kind of stillness that precedes violence. 3 minutes ago, SEAL Team 6 had been reporting steady progress through the quadrangle. Now there was nothing but the hiss of dead air and the shallow breathing of 24 personnel who understood what silence meant in that particular stretch of Afghan mountain range. The mission clock read 3:47 hours. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under floodlights, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the perimeter, the Hindu Kush rose like broken teeth against a starless sky. Aldrich's hand hovered over the emergency channel selector. He didn't want to switch frequencies. Switching meant acknowledging that the primary team might not be coming back on their assigned channel. It meant things had deteriorated past contingency, planning into the realm where operators wrote letters before missions and kept them in their footlockers. "Sir," the voice belonged to Captain Torres, the air controller whose job was to coordinate close air support. His face had taken on the gray quality of someone watching a plan disintegrate in real time. "We've got secondaries on thermal, multiple contacts converging on the exfil point." Aldrich moved to the display. The satellite feed showed heat signatures blooming in the mountain passes like malignant flowers, cutting off every avenue of retreat. Somewhere in that digital constellation of threat indicators, 16 Navy SEALs and 2 combat medics were pinned down, probably taking fire from elevated positions, definitely running low on ammunition. The enemy had done what the enemy did best in the quadrangle, turned geography into a weapon and patience into artillery. "What assets do we have airborne?" Aldrich's voice carried the flat affect of a man performing triage on a dying operation. Torres scrolled through the air tasking order. 2 F-16s just went Winchester, their RTB for rearm. Apache package is 40 minutes out, caught up in that dust storm over Kandahar. We've got 1 A-10 on station, but... He stopped. Everyone in the operations center knew what came after, but when discussing the A-10 currently orbiting at Angels 12, they'd all heard the stories, the whispered conversations that stopped when certain people entered rooms. They'd all seen the call sign on the flight manifest and felt that particular combination of doubt and desperate hope that military cultures breed in equal measure. "Get her on the line," Aldrich said. Torres hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to betray his uncertainty, short enough to maintain plausible professionalism. Then his hand moved toward the radio controls. "Blackbird 2-3, this is Bagram Control. We have a situation developing. Need you to authenticate and stand by for tasking." The radio crackled. When the voice came through, it carried the kind of calm that made uncertain men even more uncertain. Not because it wavered, but because it didn't. "Bagram Control, Blackbird 2-3, authenticated, standing by." In the pale light of the operations center, Aldrich closed his eyes for just a moment. Then he began issuing orders that would send Captain Mariana Blackbird Cortez into the most hostile airspace in theater, alone, against an enemy that had just cornered the most elite fighting force in the American military. Some decisions felt like releasing an arrow. This one felt like lighting a fuse. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft. It looked like something designed by engineers who'd been asked to build a flying tank and took the assignment literally. 30 feet long, stubby wings, twin turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage like afterthoughts. The Air Force had tried to retire it for decades. The infantry kept writing letters to Congress, begging them not to. Mariana Cortez understood why. She'd flown F-16s early in her career, sleek, fast, elegant machines that made you feel like a knife cutting through silk. The Warthog made you feel like a hammer, and sometimes what you needed wasn't a knife. She banked the aircraft into a gentle turn, maintaining her holding pattern at 12,000 feet. Below, Afghanistan spread out in shades of gray and black, the mountains rendering the landscape into something prehistoric. She'd been orbiting for 90 minutes, burning fuel, waiting for something to happen or nothing to happen. In the A-10 community, they called it hauling gas. In every other community, they called it boring. Mariana called it meditation. The radio briefing from Bagram came through in clipped, professional phrases that couldn't quite hide the urgency underneath. SEAL team pinned, multiple hostiles, elevated positions, danger close fire required, authenticate current position and weapons loadout. Mariana's hands moved across the cockpit with the muscle memory of 5,000 flight hours. Bagram control Blackbird 23. Current position 37.2 north, 70.9 east. Angels 12. Playtime 30 minutes. Loadout. Full combat mix. GAU 8 1600 rounds, 6 AGM 65s, 25 mic remaining. Ready for tasking. There was a pause on the other end. She recognized it. The pause that came when someone was deciding whether to trust her. She'd heard that pause in briefing rooms, on training ranges, in the moments before someone handed over mission-critical information. The pause that asked, can she really do this? Blackbird 23, we need you to proceed direct to grid 374821. SEAL team under effective fire from multiple positions. They're calling for immediate close air support, but be advised, minimum safe distance is compromised. They're indicating danger close on all axes. Mariana pushed the throttle forward and nosed the Warthog toward the deck. The aircraft responded with the graceless efficiency that made her love it. Bagram control, confirm danger close. I'll need direct coordination with ground element. Can you establish comms? Another pause. Then a different voice came through, younger, strained with the particular tension of watching Americans die on a screen. Blackbird Bagram, switching you to Grizzly 16. They're the element commander, frequency 287.5. Good hunting. Mariana switched frequencies as the altimeter unwound. The mountains rose to meet her, and she dropped the A-10 into the valley system like threading a needle in the dark. The voice that came through on the new frequency was tight with controlled violence. Any station, this is Grizzly 16. We are danger close, taking effective fire from multiple positions, coordinates to follow. We need gun runs on the ridgeline north and east. If someone's up there, now would be a really good time. Mariana keyed her mic. Her voice carried none of the affected calm of radio communication, none of the professional distance. It carried something else entirely, the absolute certainty of someone who had done impossible things before and would do them again. Grizzly 16, Blackbird 23, I'm 60 seconds out. I need your position marked and your team consolidated. I'm going to make some noise. There was a beat of silence. Then the SEAL commander's voice came back and something had shifted in it. Not relief, SEALs didn't do relief, but recognition. Blackbird, Grizzly, IR strobe is active. We're in the bowl, surrounded on 3 sides. They've got technical vehicles and crew-served weapons on the high ground. We are combat ineffective for movement. I say again, we cannot move from this position. Combat ineffective. The words every pilot dreaded hearing. It meant the guys on the ground weren't just pinned, they were broken, out of options, waiting for someone else to solve the problem they couldn't solve themselves. Mariana dropped the A-10 to 4,000 feet and started her scan. The aircraft's targeting pod came alive, painting the valley in shades of green and white. She could see the IR strobe immediately, a desperate pulse of light in the infrared spectrum, marking where 18 Americans were pressed into whatever cover they could find, probably bleeding, definitely scared, absolutely depending on her to be better than good. The enemy positions revealed themselves in the thermal imaging like constellations of malevolence. 3 crew-served weapons on the north ridge, 2 technical vehicles on the eastern approach, small arms fire positions scattered across the southern high ground. They had the bowl surrounded and were systematically destroying everyone inside it. It was textbook ambush tactics executed with the kind of precision that separated professionals from amateurs. These weren't insurgents. These were trained fighters who understood combined arms and fields of fire. They'd studied American tactics and built a trap specifically designed to kill the kind of warriors now calling for help. Mariana ran the calculations in her head: wind speed, altitude, target priority, minimum safe distance. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon mounted in the nose of her aircraft could fire 70 rounds per second of 30mm armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. Each round was the size of a milk bottle. The gun produced so much recoil that the aircraft slowed down when she fired it. It could destroy anything short of a main battle tank. It was also indiscriminate. If she misjudged the run by 50 feet, she'd be putting those rounds into Americans. Grizzly Blackbird, I'm starting my run on the North Ridge. Keep your heads down, this is going to be close. She didn't wait for confirmation. The A-10 responded to her touch like an extension of her own nervous system, rolling into the attack dive with the inevitability of gravity. The world narrowed to the targeting reticle, the distance countdown, the precise moment when geometry and velocity and faith intersected. At 2,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 spoke with a sound like the sky tearing in half. A sustained burst that lasted 3 seconds and sent 200 rounds of depleted uranium downrange at 3,500 feet per second. The North Ridge erupted in geysers of rock and fire. The crew-served weapons disappeared, along with the dozen fighters who'd been operating them. The recoil pushed the A-10 nose up, and Mariana corrected instinctively, already calculating the next run. Grizzly Blackbird, North Ridge is suppressed, rolling in on eastern approach, targeting vehicles. She pulled the aircraft into a hard left bank, bleeding altitude, setting up the angle. Below, the SEALs would be hearing the thunder of her gun, feeling the concussion waves wash over their position, starting to believe that maybe they weren't going to die in this valley. That faith was precious and fragile, and Mariana treated it with the reverence it deserved. She would not let them down. The eastern approach required a different touch. The technical vehicles were moving, trying to reposition, their crews understanding that staying static meant dying. Mariana selected an AGM-65 Maverick missile, locked the infrared seeker onto the lead vehicle, and fired. The missile leapt away from the wing mount with a solid thunk, accelerating to supersonic speed, tracking its target with mechanical precision. 2 seconds later, the technical vehicle transformed into a fireball that lit up the valley like a miniature sun. The second vehicle tried to run. Mariana put a burst from the GAU-8 through its engine block, and it rolled to a stop, burning. The crew bilayed out, running for cover that no longer existed. She let them go. Her mission wasn't to kill everyone. It was to break the ambush, to create enough chaos and fear that the enemy force lost coherence and the SEALs could survive long enough for extraction. Grizzly Blackbird, eastern approach is clear. I've got eyes on southern positions. They're breaking contact. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they regroup. Use it. The SEAL commander's voice came back, and the strain had been replaced with something else. Respect, raw and undeniable. Blackbird, Grizzly, you just saved 18 lives. We are moving to alternate exfil point. Can you provide cover while we move? Mariana checked her fuel gauge. Playtime was down to 15 minutes. If she stayed much longer, she'd be landing at Bagram on fumes, and the A-10 didn't glide well. But 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours when you just watched the impossible happen through a targeting pod. Grizzly Blackbird, I'm not going anywhere. Move your team. I've got your back. For the next 12 minutes, Mariana Cortez turned that valley into her personal theater of operation. She orbited at 3,000 feet, scanning for any enemy movement, occasionally dropping down to strafe positions that looked like they might be reforming. The A-10 became an extension of her will, a flying embodiment of the promise she'd made to herself years ago when she first pinned on wings, that she would be the person others could count on when everything else failed. The SEALs moved through the darkness below, displaced to an alternate landing zone, and waited for the helicopters that were finally clear of the dust storm and inbound. Mariana stayed overhead until she saw the Chinooks touch down, until the infrared strobes disappeared inside those big helicopters, until Grizzly 16 came up on frequency one last time. Blackbird Grizzly, all personnel accounted for. We're airborne and headed home. We owe you one. Actually, we owe you about 18. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. Mariana keyed her mic, and for the first time that night she let a little warmth into her voice. Grizzly, Blackbird, that's what we do. See you at the debrief. Blackbird 23 is RTB. She turned the A-10 toward Bagram and climbed back to altitude, the aircraft's turbofans humming their steady song. Behind her, the valley returned to silence, and in operations centers across Afghanistan, people who'd been watching the mission unfold through satellite feeds and radio communications began to tell a story that would spread through the military community like wildfire. A story about the night the SEALs got cornered, and a single A-10 pilot tore the enemy apart and brought everyone home. They didn't talk about luck. They talked about skill. They talked about courage. And slowly, reluctantly at first, they started to talk about Mariana Cortez without that pause, without the doubt, with something that looked a lot like respect. The sun was threatening the eastern horizon when Mariana landed at Bagram. She went through her post-flight checks with the same methodical precision she brought to everything, then climbed down from the cockpit and walked across the tarmac toward the operations center. Her flight suit was dark with sweat despite the cold, and her hands were steady despite the adrenaline still singing through her veins. The crew chief who'd been waiting for her return gave her a thumbs up and a grin that said he'd heard what happened. She nodded back and kept walking. Inside the operations center, Major Aldrich was waiting with Captain Torres and a half-dozen other officers who'd monitored the mission. The room went quiet when she entered, not the uncomfortable silence of judgment, but the respectful silence of professionals acknowledging someone who'd just done something extraordinary. Aldrich stepped forward, and his expression was complicated in the way that senior officers' expressions got when they were trying to reconcile their assumptions with reality. Captain Cortez, hell of a mission, hell of a job. He paused, and something in his face suggested he was working through words he hadn't expected to say. The SEAL team commander specifically requested that I pass along his personal thanks. He said, and I'm quoting here, that pilot is welcome in any firefight we're ever in, anytime, anywhere. Mariana kept her face neutral, but something warm moved through her chest. Praise from a SEAL team commander wasn't just words, it was currency in a community that respected actions above all else. Thank you, sir. Just doing the mission. Torres spoke up from his station. Ma'am, we pulled the gun camera footage. That first run on the North Ridge, you were 60 feet above minimum safe distance. 60 feet. With that much ordnance downrange, you were basically threading a needle while someone shot at you. She met his eyes and saw what she'd been seeing in military spaces for 8 years, the slow transition from skepticism to belief. 60 feet is 60 feet, Captain. Either it's safe or it isn't. I don't do basically. The room absorbed that statement. In the silence, Mariana understood that she'd just crossed a threshold. Not from incompetence to competence, she'd always been competent. From outsider to insider. From the pilot they questioned to the pilot they called when things got desperate. It was a transition she'd been forcing through sheer excellence for her entire career, and tonight it had finally clicked into place in the minds of the people around her. Aldrich gestured toward the briefing room. We'll do the full debrief at 800, but I wanted to touch base now while it's fresh. What's your assessment of the enemy force you engaged? Mariana pulled up the mental map she'd been building during the mission. Organized, disciplined. They had interlocking fields of fire and good tactical positioning. They knew how to set an ambush for American forces, which means they've either been trained by someone who knows our doctrine or they've survived enough engagements to learn it themselves. The technical vehicles were well maintained, and the crew-served weapons were positioned for maximum effect. These weren't insurgents. These were professionals. Torres frowned. Intel brief said the area was mostly low-level Taliban remnants. If you're right about this being a professional force, We've got a bigger problem than one firefight. I'm right, Mariana said simply. And yes, you do. She spent another 20 minutes in the operations center, going through the immediate after-action items, confirming weapons expenditure, noting fuel consumption and aircraft performance. All the mundane details that made the difference between a mission flown and a mission learned from. Then she excused herself and walked out into the Afghan dawn. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold that made them look almost beautiful. Almost made you forget that they were full of people who wanted to kill you. Mariana stood on the edge of the tarmac and let the morning light wash over her face. She was tired in the way that came after adrenaline faded, the bone-deep exhaustion that reminded you that you were still human despite what you'd just done. Behind her, the door to the operations center opened and someone approached. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She could tell by the footsteps, measured, confident, the gait of someone comfortable with authority, that it was Aldrich. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking, both of them watching the sunrise like it was something neither had seen before. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology." Mariana glanced at him. His face was tired, showing the strain of a night spent managing crises and making decisions that affected lives. But there was something else there too, something that looked like integrity struggling with pride. "When I saw your call sign on the manifest, I had doubts," he continued. "Not about your ability to fly, your record speaks for itself, but about whether you could handle this kind of mission under this kind of pressure. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." She considered his words, turning them over in her mind like stones she might keep or throw away. "With respect, sir, I don't need your apology. I need your trust. The next time someone's life depends on the pilot you send, I need you to look at the record, not the assumptions. Can you do that?" Aldrich met her eyes. "Yes, I can do that." "Then we're good, sir." They stood together for another moment, watching the day begin. Two professionals who understood that respect was earned in moments like these, and maintained through actions that followed. Then Aldrich nodded once and walked back toward the operations center, leaving Mariana alone with the sunrise and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd just rewritten someone's opinion through the only method that ever really worked, being undeniably excellent. She allowed herself 5 more minutes of stillness, then turned and headed for the ready room. There would be paperwork, debriefings, maintenance reports, and then, if she was lucky, 6 hours of sleep before the next sortie. The military didn't pause for self-reflection. You did the job, you survived the job, and then you got ready to do the job again. That was the rhythm she'd learned to live by. But as she walked across the tarmac, she allowed herself one small moment of pride. Somewhere in that valley, 18 Navy SEALs were alive because she'd been overhead when they needed her. That was worth more than apologies or recognition. That was the reason she'd fought so hard to be here in the first place. The debrief at 800 was standing room only. Word had spread through Bagram with the speed that news always traveled in military communities. The kind of speed that suggested the story had already been embellished, mythologized, turned into something slightly larger than life. Mariana sat at the front of the briefing room with Major Aldrich and the intelligence officer, Captain Sarah Chen, while what looked like half the base's aviation assets crowded into the available space. The formal after-action review was precisely that, formal. They went through the mission timeline, analyzed the gun camera footage, discussed the enemy disposition and tactics. Captain Chen presented updated intelligence that confirmed Mariana's assessment. The force in the valley had been part of a larger organized unit, well-trained and well-equipped, operating in an area previously assessed as low threat. That assessment was being revised. When they got to the gun runs, Chen pulled up the footage on the main display. The room went silent as everyone watched the nose camera perspective of the A-10 diving toward the ridgeline, watched the targeting reticle settle on the enemy positions, watched the tracer rounds from the GAU-8 cut through the darkness like laser beams from hell. The footage didn't capture the sound. the horrible, beautiful thunder of the gun that had given the A-10 its nickname among ground forces. They called it the BRRRRT, the sound of salvation. Captain Cortez. Chen's voice pulled her back to the present. Can you walk us through your decision-making process on the first run? Specifically, how you calculated minimum safe distance with the ground element in such close proximity. Mariana stood and moved to the display. She could feel the room's attention shift, could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that still lingered in some corners. They wanted to understand how she'd done what she'd done, whether it was skill or luck, whether she could do it again. The SEALs were in the bowl here, she said, highlighting the position on the map. Enemy positions on 3 sides, elevated with clear fields of fire. The North Ridge was the immediate threat, crew-served weapons with direct line of sight to the ground element. Taking it out was priority 1. She zoomed in on the topography. The challenge was that the ground element couldn't move to create separation. They were fixed in place, which meant I had to work around their position. I calculated the angle of attack to maximize the standoff distance while maintaining accuracy on target. The A-10's gun system has a dispersion pattern that's predictable if you understand the ballistics. I chose an approach angle that put the maximum distance between the strike zone and the ground element, while still ensuring effective fire on the enemy position. Someone in the back raised a hand, a young lieutenant from one of the F-16 squadrons. Ma'am, with respect, 60 feet isn't a margin, that's a prayer. How did you know you wouldn't short the rounds into the friendlies? Mariana turned to face him directly. I didn't know. I calculated, I planned, and I executed with the best information I had. But no, Lieutenant, I didn't know. What I did know was that if I didn't make that run, 18 Americans were going to die. So I made the run. That's the job. The room absorbed that answer. It wasn't the confident, certain response they might have expected. It was something more honest, something that acknowledged the reality of combat aviation, that sometimes you made decisions based on incomplete information and the willingness to accept the consequences if you were wrong. Major Aldrich stood up. What Captain Cortez isn't saying is that she's been making decisions like that for 8 years. She has 5,000 hours in the A-10, combat deployments to 3 theaters, and a record that speaks for itself. Last night wasn't luck. It was skill, judgment, and courage. And it's exactly the kind of flying we need more of in this theater. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on officers and aviators who'd been skeptical, who'd questioned, who'd doubted. I'm making a recommendation that Captain Cortez be considered for any future missions requiring precision close air support in danger-close situations. Her tactical judgment under pressure is exactly what this kind of operation demands. Mariana kept her face neutral, but inside, something shifted. Official recognition from a senior officer in a formal setting wasn't just praise, it was political capital. It was the kind of endorsement that changed assignment patterns and opened doors. It meant other commanders would request her by name instead of questioning whether she could handle the mission. It meant she just vaulted over a barrier that had been in place since the day she first walked into a military flight briefing and encountered that pause. The debrief continued for another hour, covering logistics, fuel consumption, weapons expenditure, and maintenance issues. Then everyone filed out, returning to their regular duties, carrying with them the story of the mission and the aviator who'd executed it. Captain Torres caught up with Mariana outside the briefing room. Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for last night. When Major Aldrich ordered me to contact you, I hesitated. I shouldn't have. I let my assumptions override my professionalism. Mariana studied him for a moment. He was young, maybe 27, with the earnest intensity of someone who took their mistakes seriously. She respected that. Captain, you know what I appreciate more than an apology? Learning. You hesitated once. Don't hesitate again. Not because I'm asking you to trust me specifically, but because doubt in the moment can cost lives. Trust the record, trust the training, trust the system that puts someone in that cockpit. Can you do that? Torres nodded. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. Good, then we're done here. She walked away before he could say anything else. She'd already had this conversation too many times in her career. The apology, the recognition, the promise to do better. She appreciated the sentiment, but what she really wanted was for it to stop being necessary. For her presence in a cockpit to be so normal that nobody thought twice about it. For the pause to disappear completely. That evening, word came through unofficial channels that the SEAL team was requesting to meet with her. Not as part of any official debrief, but as a personal gesture. Mariana considered declining. She didn't need the recognition, didn't want to turn the mission into something theatrical. But then she remembered the voice of Grizzly 16 on the radio, the strain and fear giving way to something else. These were people who'd looked death in the face and watched her make it flinch. They deserved whatever closure or gratitude they needed to process that experience. She met them at 2100 hours in one of the secure briefing rooms reserved for special operations. All 18 of them were there, along with their commander. Lieutenant Commander Derek Stone was exactly what you'd expect a SEAL team leader to be: compact, intense, with eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine and processed them without breaking. He stepped forward when she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other, two professionals from different worlds united by a single night in a hostile valley. Captain Cortez, Stone said, and his voice carried a weight that formal ranks couldn't capture. I wanted to meet you in person, wanted my team to meet you. What you did last night, there aren't words for it. We've worked with close air support dozens of times and we've seen good flying. But what you did was something else. You took risks that most pilots wouldn't touch, made decisions in seconds that saved our lives and executed them perfectly. We're alive because of you. Mariana met his gaze. You're alive because you did your job well enough to survive until I could get there. That's teamwork, Commander, not heroics. One of the other SEALs spoke up, a senior chief with a bandage on his left arm and the look of someone who'd been very close to not making it home. Ma'am, with respect, that's bullshit. We were done. We had maybe 5 minutes before they overran our position. Then we heard that gun and everything changed. You didn't just provide air support. You owned that valley. You made them afraid. Mariana understood what he was really saying. Fear was a weapon, and she'd wielded it against an enemy that had been winning. She'd taken their advantage and turned it into terror. That was what the GAU-8 did when fired by someone who knew how to use it. It didn't just destroy targets. It broke the will to fight. I'm glad you're here, she said simply. All of you, that's what matters. They talked for another 30 minutes. Not about tactics or procedures, but about the human dimensions of what had happened. The SEAL who'd thought he was about to die writing mental goodbye letters to his kids. The combat medic who'd been treating wounded under fire and waiting for the round that would end him. The team leader who'd been calculating impossible odds and trying to figure out which men to sacrifice to save the others. All of them carried pieces of that night, and somehow talking to the person who'd pulled them through, it helped make those pieces manageable. When the meeting ended, Stone walked her to the door. Ma'am, I meant what I told Major Aldrich. You're welcome in any firefight we're ever in. I'll request you specifically if we have the option. That's not just gratitude, that's recognition of excellence. Mariana nodded. I'll be there if you need me, Commander. That's the deal we all made when we signed up. She left the briefing room and stepped out into the Afghan night. The stars were absurdly bright, the way they always were in places without light pollution. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the same sky she'd been flying through hours earlier, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Satisfaction. The knowledge that she'd been tested under the worst possible circumstances and hadn't been found wanting. The nickname Blackbird had come from her first squadron commander during training, after he'd watched her fly a night mission with such precision that he'd said she moved through darkness like she was part of it. She'd carried that call sign through 3 deployments and countless missions. But after tonight, she knew it would mean something different. It would mean the pilot who'd pulled off the impossible, the aviator SEALs requested by name, the woman who'd made the pause disappear through sheer, undeniable excellence. She allowed herself a small smile, then turned and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow there would be more missions, more challenges, more opportunities to prove that she belonged in this world. But tonight, she'd done enough. Tonight, she'd earned her place in a way that even the doubters couldn't question. The call sign would spread. The story would grow. And somewhere in a military culture that resisted change even as it demanded evolution, Mariana Cortez had just forced an adjustment in perspective that would ripple forward for years to come. Not through politics or advocacy, but through the simple act of being exceptional when it mattered most. That was how real change happened. Not through words, but through moments. Not through arguments, but through results. And on this particular night, in a valley in Afghanistan where 18 lives hung in the balance, Mariana had delivered results that would be remembered long after the mission reports were filed and forgotten. She slept deeply that night, the sleep of someone who'd done hard things and done them well. And when she woke 6 hours later to prepare for another day of flying, she carried with her the quiet confidence of knowing that she'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. From now on, when people heard the call sign Blackbird, they wouldn't pause. They'd remember. And in a military culture built on tradition and proven performance, being remembered was the same as being trusted. Over the next 2 weeks, the story of the Valley firefight spread through the military aviation community like wildfire through dry grass. It moved from Bagram to Kandahar, from Afghanistan to bases in Qatar and Kuwait, from the Middle East back to the United States. Each telling added details, embellished moments, turned a successful close air support mission into something that approached legend. Mariana heard the whispers in ready rooms and dining facilities, saw the glances that lingered a moment longer than before, felt the subtle shift in how people treated her. The operational tempo at Bagram didn't slow for recognition or reputation. 3 days after the SEAL rescue, Mariana was back in the cockpit flying a different mission, armed reconnaissance over the Pakistan border, hunting for weapons shipments moving through the mountain passes. 2 days after that, she provided cover for a Marine convoy that had taken a wrong turn and ended up in contested territory. The day after that, she flew close air support for an Army Special Forces team conducting a high-value target raid. The A-10 kept flying, and she kept flying it, each mission adding to the accumulating flight hours and combat experience that separated career pilots from exceptional ones. But something had changed. The requests for her specifically began appearing in mission briefs. Ground commanders who had choices about which air assets to use started asking for Blackbird by name. The skepticism that had shadowed her career began to evaporate, replaced by something more valuable, professional respect earned through performance under pressure. The pause was still there sometimes, particularly with people who hadn't heard the stories, but it was fading, being replaced by reputation. Major Aldrich called her into his office on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the Valley mission. She walked through the door expecting another tasking, another crisis that needed the particular skill set she'd proven she possessed. Instead, she found him standing next to his desk with a small box in his hand, and an expression that suggested he was about to do something he found both necessary and uncomfortable. "Captain Cortez, close the door." She did, then stood at attention. Aldrich gestured for her to relax, then opened the box to reveal a distinguished flying cross, the medal awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement in aerial flight. The bronze cross gleamed in the fluorescent light of the office, and Mariana felt something complicated move through her chest. Recognition was gratifying, but she hadn't done the mission for recognition. She'd done it because 18 people needed help, and she was the one in position to provide it. "This came through faster than usual," Aldrich said. "Lieutenant Commander Stone pushed it through his chain of command, and apparently a SEAL team leader has enough pull to expedite paperwork when he wants to. The citation recognizes your actions on the night of the Valley firefight. Your skill, courage, and tactical judgment under extreme pressure, your willingness to accept risk to save friendly forces, your exemplary performance that reflects great credit upon yourself, your unit, and the United States Air Force. He paused, and his expression softened slightly. When I signed the endorsement for this award, I included a personal note. I said that in 20 years of military service, I'd rarely seen flying that combined technical precision with tactical innovation and raw courage in equal measure. I meant it. You've set a standard that others in this command will be measured against. Mariana accepted the box, feeling the weight of the medal and everything it represented. Thank you, sir. I'm honored. You should be. But more than that, you should understand what this means going forward. You're not just another A-10 pilot anymore. You're someone with a reputation. Ground commanders will request you. Media affairs will probably want to interview you at some point. I've already turned down 2 requests. Your career trajectory just changed. Where you go from here depends on what you do with that change. She met his eyes. I'm going to keep flying, sir. Keep doing the mission. That's what matters. Aldrich nodded slowly. That's the right answer. But also understand that visibility comes with responsibility. People are watching now. Not just what you do in the cockpit, but how you conduct yourself on the ground. You're representing something larger than yourself. Female aviators, A-10 pilots, anyone who's ever been doubted and had to prove themselves through excellence. That's not fair, but it's reality. Mariana considered his words. She'd been carrying that weight for her entire career, the burden of representation that came with being one of the few. But Aldrich was right that it had shifted into a different register now. She wasn't just representing through her presence. She was representing through recognized achievement. The bar was higher, the margin for error smaller. I understand, sir. I'll keep that in mind. Good, now get out of here. You've got a mission brief in 30 minutes. She left his office carrying the metal box and thinking about what came next. The immediate answer was simple: more flying, more missions, more opportunities to prove that the Valley firefight wasn't an anomaly. But beyond that, she could sense the shape of something larger. A career that might extend beyond cockpits into command, into training, into shaping the future of close air support doctrine. She wasn't sure she wanted that. She was a pilot first, and the idea of trading flight time for desk time made her uncomfortable. But she also understood that influence mattered. That change often came from people willing to accept responsibilities beyond the ones they preferred. The mission brief 30 minutes later was routine: armed reconnaissance along a known infiltration route, 4 hours of flying, standard loadout. Nothing that required the kind of tactical innovation she demonstrated in the Valley. But routine missions were the foundation of military aviation. For every dramatic firefight, there were 100 hours of flying through empty sky, watching for threats that never materialized, being present in case something happened. That presence was its own form of value. It meant ground forces knew they had coverage. It meant enemy forces knew they'd face consequences if they moved. It meant the air superiority that allowed everything else to function. Mariana flew that mission with the same precision she brought to everything, completed her objectives, and returned to Bagram without incident. Then she did it again the next day and the day after that. The rhythm of deployment reasserted itself: fly, debrief, eat, sleep, repeat. The medal sat in her locker, untouched after the initial receipt, because medals didn't fly missions. Skill did, experience did. The willingness to strap into a cockpit and accept the responsibility of being the person others counted on. But the story kept spreading. She heard her name mentioned in conversations she wasn't part of, saw references to the Blackbird mission in situation reports and tactical analyses, received emails from aviators she'd never met, asking questions about how she'd executed specific maneuvers or calculated particular risks. The mission was becoming part of the institutional knowledge of close air support aviation, studied and dissected and learned from. 3 weeks became 4, 4 became 6. Afghanistan's winter began giving way to the early suggestions of spring. though in the mountains the distinction was mostly academic, cold versus slightly less cold. Mariana flew through it all, accumulating missions and flight hours, becoming a known quantity in the way that mattered most to ground forces. They knew she'd show up, knew she'd execute, knew she could be trusted when things went wrong. That trust was currency, and she was wealthy in it. Then, in late March, a new tasking came through that changed everything again. Not because of what it required in the moment, but because of what it represented for the future. Major Aldrich called her into his office again, but this time his expression suggested something more complicated than a simple medal presentation or routine mission update. "Captain Cortez, you're being temporarily reassigned." Mariana felt something tighten in her chest. Reassignments during deployment usually meant problems, investigations, health issues, personal emergencies. "Sir." Aldrich gestured for her to sit. "Relax. This isn't disciplinary. It's actually the opposite. Higher Headquarters wants you at Nellis Air Force Base for a 2-week advanced tactical training course. They're developing new close air support doctrine based on lessons learned from the past year's operations, and they specifically requested aviators who have demonstrated exceptional performance in danger-close scenarios. Your name came up first." She processed that information. Nellis was home to the Air Force's advanced training programs, including the weapons school where the best pilots went to become even better. Being selected for a doctrinal development course meant joining conversations about the future of how the Air Force fought. It was a recognition of expertise that extended beyond individual performance into strategic thinking. "When do I leave?" 72 hours. You'll fly back to the States, complete the course, then return here to finish your deployment. Consider it an opportunity to influence how we train the next generation of close air support aviators." He paused. "Also consider it unavoidable. This isn't a request. Higher Headquarters wants your perspective in the room, and when Headquarters wants something, captains make it happen." Mariana nodded. "Understood, sir. I'll be ready." "One more thing." Aldrich's expression shifted into something that might have been concern. "You're going to be the only woman in that course, the only female pilot in a room full of very experienced, very confident male aviators, some of whom will have opinions about whether you belong there. I'm telling you this not because I think you can't handle it. You've proven you can handle anything, but because forewarned is forearmed." She appreciated the warning even though it wasn't news. She'd been the only woman in rooms full of male aviators more times than she could count. The dynamics were always the same: initial skepticism, testing, eventual acceptance if you proved yourself capable. She'd learned to navigate those waters years ago. "I'll be fine, sir. I'm used to it." "I know you are, which is exactly why you're the right person for this assignment." 72 hours later, Mariana boarded a C-17 transport bound for the United States, leaving behind the mountains of Afghanistan and the operational rhythm she'd settled into. The flight home was long and uncomfortable, the military transport designed for cargo and troops rather than comfort. She slept in fits and starts, her mind already shifting from the tactical immediacy of combat operations to the more abstract challenges of doctrinal development. Nellis Air Force Base sprawled across the Nevada desert like a monument to American air power. Fighter jets screamed overhead at regular intervals, practicing maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilots to their limits. The base was home to some of the best pilots in the world, people who'd been selected for their skill, and then refined that skill through training regimens that separated exceptional from merely excellent. Walking onto Nellis felt like entering a temple dedicated to the art of aerial warfare. The Advanced Tactical Training Course convened in a secure briefing room on the second floor of the weapons school building. Mariana arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did, and found herself alone in a space designed to hold 30 people. The walls were covered with maps and tactical diagrams, the front of the room dominated by multiple large displays. It looked like every military briefing room she'd ever been in, which was to say it looked like a place where important decisions got made by people who understood the cost of getting those decisions wrong. Other aviators began filtering in, all of them male, all of them carrying themselves with the particular confidence that came from being very good at something difficult. They ranged in age from late 20s to early 40s, represented multiple aircraft types, F-16s, F-15Es, A-10s, AC-130s, and came from bases across the Middle East. Most of them knew each other, or knew of each other. The close air support community was small enough that reputations preceded people. Mariana watched them notice her, watched the calculations happen behind their eyes. Some showed open curiosity. Others showed skepticism. A few showed something that might have been resentment, the reaction of people who'd worked hard to get selected for something and were now wondering if someone else's selection had been influenced by factors beyond pure merit. She'd seen all these reactions before. They didn't bother her anymore. What mattered was what happened after the reactions, when performance replaced assumption. A colonel she didn't recognize entered the room, and everyone took their seats. The colonel was older, probably mid-50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades flying through hostile skis and lived to talk about it. His name tag read Morrison, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who didn't need to raise it to command attention. Welcome to the Close Air Support Doctrine Development Working Group. You're here because you represent the best close air support aviators currently deployed in theater. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to analyze current tactics, evaluate emerging threats, and develop recommendations for how the Air Force conducts close air support operations going forward. Your experience, your judgment, and your willingness to challenge assumptions will shape how we fight for the next decade. No pressure. A few people chuckled. Morrison didn't smile. We're going to start by going around the room. State your name, aircraft type, current deployment location, and one close air support mission that challenged you. Keep it brief. Keep it relevant. We'll dive deeper later. The introductions began, working clockwise around the room. Each pilot stood, gave their information, and shared a story that usually involved difficult terrain, close proximity to friendly forces, or enemy air defenses. The stories were uniformly impressive. These were people who'd been doing hard things in dangerous places and succeeding. Mariana listened carefully, cataloging the common themes and unique challenges, building a mental map of what this group collectively knew. Then it was her turn. She stood, and the room's attention shifted. She could feel the weight of it, the assessment happening in real time. Everyone here had heard stories about the Valley firefight, but stories were different from the person who'd actually flown the mission. Captain Mariana Cortez, Thunderbolt II, currently deployed to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. The mission that challenged me most was a SEAL team extraction 3 months ago in the Korangal Valley. A-10 personnel pinned down in a bowl formation, surrounded on 3 sides by an organized enemy force with crew-served weapons and technical vehicles. Danger close on all axes, minimum safe distance compromised, no room for error. I executed multiple gun runs and missile strikes, destroyed enemy positions while maintaining 60 feet of separation from friendlies, and covered the team's movement to alternate exfil. All personnel recovered safely. She sat down. The room was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Colonel Morrison nodded once, his expression suggesting he just confirmed something he already suspected, and moved on to the next person. But Mariana could feel the shift in the room's energy. She just established credibility through the simplest possible method, stating facts that spoke for themselves. These were people who understood the difficulty of what she described. They knew that 60 feet of separation in a danger-close scenario wasn't just difficult. It was nearly impossible, and she'd done it successfully. The introductions continued, but something had changed. When people looked at her now, the skepticism had been replaced by curiosity and something that might have been respect. She'd passed the first test, proving she belonged in this room not because someone had checked a diversity box, but because she'd earned her seat through documented excellence. Over the next 2 weeks, Mariana participated in the most intellectually demanding professional development experience of her career. The working group analyzed mission data, studied enemy tactics, evaluated technological capabilities, and argued about the future of close air support with the kind of intensity that only came from people who cared deeply about getting it right. They dissected missions frame by frame, debated minimum safe distances, analyzed weapons effects, and challenged each other's assumptions with professional courtesy that occasionally tipped into professional combat. Mariana held her own. More than held her own, she contributed insights that came from her particular combination of technical skill and tactical experience. When they discussed danger-close procedures, she pushed for more flexible guidelines that gave pilots discretion based on conditions rather than rigid standoff distances. When they analyzed enemy tactics, she emphasized the importance of understanding organized enemy forces versus insurgents, drawing on her observations from the Valley firefight. When they evaluated aircraft capabilities, she made the case for the A-10's continued relevance in an era when everyone wanted to retire it. She also found herself becoming a de facto spokesperson for perspectives that the rest of the group might not have considered. When they discussed ground force integration, she raised questions about communication protocols that weren't always intuitive from the air. When they evaluated risk assessment, she pushed back on assumptions that didn't account for the actual calculus pilots performed under pressure. She wasn't trying to be contrarian. She was trying to ensure the doctrine they developed reflected reality, rather than idealized scenarios. By the end of the first week, something interesting had happened.